Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity. You guys sent in so many highlights and notes, it's obvious that you're ready to get into it. All those big questions about knowledge and progress, humanity's place in the universe.
Yeah, it looks like you're really interested in how Deutsch kind of challenges how we think about learning from the past. Like you all highlighted that bit about flying, where he says just watching birds wasn't enough. To actually get off the ground, we had to figure out like the whole how and why of aerodynamics.
Exactly. It's like he's saying we can't just bank on what happened before to know what's going to happen next. So then how do we get to real knowledge if looking back isn't enough?
Well, he calls that whole relying on past experience thing inductivism. And he basically says it's a trap. You know that classic example, we've always seen the sun rise, so it'll always rise. Like inductive reasoning gets you there, but it misses the why.
Because it's the Earth's rotation. It's not that the sun will always rise. It's that sunrise is relative to where we are.
Exactly. So Deutsch pushes us toward what he calls good explanations. They're not just like descriptions of what we see. It's about getting the underlying principles. They're hard to vary, and they still have to account for like all the stuff they're trying to explain.
Okay, so instead of assuming the sun's going to rise just because it always has, got to understand why it seems to. But how does this good explanations thing actually play out? I mean, like practically.
Think about that shift from everyone thinking the Earth was the center of everything to the heliocentric model. For a long time, people just went with Earth as the center because it fit what they saw every day. But then there were things they couldn't explain, like the planets moving backwards sometimes. That explanation was too easy to vary.
Right, and then Copernicus and Galileo come along with the whole Earth goes around the sun thing. I mean, at first it sounds kind of crazy, but in the end it was a much better way to explain things.
Exactly, and that's what makes it a good explanation. It wasn't just about predicting where planets would be. It was like a deeper understanding of how the whole solar system worked. Harder to vary, but still fits all the data.
This is making me think about another one of the parts you highlighted, fallibilism. I gotta admit, that word always trips me up a little.
Oh.
What's the connection to what we're talking about?
So fallibilism basically means accepting that we could be wrong, knowing that what we know now might change. Think about it even with the heliocentric model. Like our understanding of the universe kept growing. We learned about galaxies and relativity stuff those early astronomers couldn't have even dreamed of.
So instead of clinging to the idea that we have it all figured out, we got to be open to new discoveries and better explanations.
Exactly. And that's huge for scientific progress. If we're stuck thinking we're already right, we stop asking questions. We shut down all those new possibilities.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Speaking of limited perspectives, I'm curious about your thoughts on the whole spaceship Earth metaphor. Deutsch seems to have some problems with it. He calls it parochial. Stuck on this idea that Earth is fragile and special. It misses how huge the universe is and the potential for humans to reach out there through knowledge. We tend to see things from our limited earthbound perspective.
So instead of feeling trapped on this spaceship, we should be looking outward, understanding that our knowledge can go beyond Earth's limits.
Think about it. We used to think Earth was the center of everything. Now we know it's just one planet going around a pretty average star in a huge universe. Who's to say we can't keep learning, keep expanding, and reach past those limits?
That is definitely an optimistic way to see things. And speaking of optimism, you also highlighted Deutsch's thoughts on design in nature. Like he uses the example of eyebrows, how they seem so perfectly designed for a purpose.
He says that Socrates, who used eyebrows as an example, never actually defined design. Like, does the sun have a design? A rainbow? What's the difference from eyebrows?
So she's saying maybe there are ways to explain that seeming design in nature without needing a designer.
Yeah, he's pointing out that assuming design needs a designer is flawed. He says that the idea of design a lot of times depends on who's doing the designing and what they meant to do. Like eyebrows are here because of evolution, not because someone decided to stick hairy things above our eyes.
But like thinking a snowflake was carefully crafted when it's really just natural processes doing their thing.
Exactly. And that leads us to another cool concept you pointed out, the jump to universality.
Yes, that one. I'm ready for another mind bender. Break it down for me. What's the jump about?
Okay, so think of it like this. It's when a small improvement suddenly unlocks a ton of potential. Like imagine a simple tool, a hammer gets tweaked, so it can not only hit nails, but also carve fancy designs, pry open locked doors, even build complicated machines.
So it's not just gradual getting better, it's a sudden leap forward in what's possible.
Exactly, those aha moments in history, where a new discovery or invention opened up a whole new world. Deutsch argues that DNA is a great example of this.
Right. It started out making simple bacteria, and now look, this incredible variety of light.
And it all came from that jump to universality when DNA became the way to replicate. It totally changed what life could be.
So these jumps seem to be key for how things progress. They push systems to a whole other level of complexity in what they can do.
And Deutsch says understanding those jumps is key to understanding progress itself. He says progress isn't a smooth, straight climb. It's more like stairs with these sudden jumps up, driven by these moments of radical expansion.
So instead of always expecting things to just get a little better, we should be looking for those breakthroughs, the ones that totally change the game.
Exactly. And he believes those jumps aren't just in the past. There are probably a bunch more out there waiting to be found, each one with the power to change how we see the world.
That is a really exciting thought. It means there's no limit to how far we can go.
Deutsch is a big believer in that limitless potential, but he stresses that reaching it depends on how we think, being committed to reason, thinking critically, and always going after those good explanations we talked about.
So it's not just sitting around waiting for those jumps. It's about creating the conditions for them to happen.
Exactly. We need a culture that celebrates creativity, welcomes different viewpoints, and encourages taking risks and challenging the way things are now. That's where these jumps can really take off.
This makes me think about what we were saying about those anti-rational memes and how important it is to fight against anything that tries to stifle critical thinking.
You got it. Deutsch sees the Enlightenment as this ongoing battle against those forces. He says that protecting reason and critical thinking is absolutely essential for any progress in the future.
It makes you realize that progress isn't some guaranteed thing. We have to really fight for it, create the conditions where knowledge can grow and thrive.
And Deutsch believes that fight is worth it, not just for us, but for all the generations to come. He sees this future where humanity is spread out in the cosmos, creating new knowledge, solving new problems, pushing the limits of what's possible way beyond anything we can even imagine right now.
It's inspiring. It gives me hope, even with all the complicated challenges in the world today.
That feeling of hope, based on the power of human reason and creativity, that's at the heart of the beginning of infinity.
This deep dive has been incredible. It's really made me rethink some things, broadened my perspective, and honestly left me feeling really optimistic about the future. So before we move on to the next part of our discussion,
Yep.
what are your biggest takeaways from what we've talked about with Deutsch's work so far?
What really sticks with me is how he connects all these different ideas, the nature of knowledge, the evolution of culture, the possibility of a multiverse. He paints this big picture of a universe where creating knowledge is the driving force and where humanity has this potential to reach incredible heights. But reaching that potential requires a certain way of thinking, a commitment to reason, a willingness to challenge what we think we know, and a really strong belief in the power of human ingenuity.
It's a powerful message, and I think it'll really resonate with our listeners. Are you ready to go even deeper in the final part of our deep dive?
Absolutely. I'm really interested in getting into Deutsch's concept of the jump to universality and what it might mean for the future of knowledge and progress. It's a concept that ties together a lot of what we've been exploring today. Welcome back to our deep dive into the beginning of infinity. Before we jump into the multiverse, I know you're excited about that, let's touch on another area you highlighted, the evolution of culture. You had some interesting notes about how Deutsch applies his ideas about knowledge and explanation to something as complex as culture.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about good explanations for scientific discoveries, but
Yeah.
how does that apply to art music traditions, all that intangible stuff that makes up culture?
Well, Deutsch starts by defining culture as a set of ideas that cause their holders to behave alike in some ways. And he uses the term ideas pretty broadly, any information stored in our brains that affects behavior.
Okay, so it's not just about the things a culture produces, but the shared beliefs and behaviors that tie a group of people together.
It's exactly, think about it, languages, religions, political systems, even things like fashion or cooking styles. These are all examples of cultural ideas that get passed down and shape how we interact with the world.
But cultures are constantly changing too. How does Deutsch explain that evolution?
He makes this fascinating comparison to biological evolution. Just like genes are the replicators in biology, Deutsch argues that memes are the replicators in culture.
Wait, memes, like those funny pictures on the internet.
Not quite, though. The internet kind of embodies the concept. In this context, a meme is any unit of cultural information, a belief, a practice, a catchy tune, anything that could be transmitted from person to person.
So are you saying memes like genes compete for survival? Only the fittest memes get passed on.
Exactly. Memes spread through communicate imitation learning. Those that are most successful at replicating themselves become widespread within a culture.
Okay, but what makes a meme fit in the cultural sense?
Deutsch says that the most successful memes offer some kind of benefit to their holders. This could be practical, emotional, social, anything that makes people more likely to adopt and spread that meme.
So it's not just random chance or popularity contests. There's a selective pressure based on usefulness.
Exactly. A true idea, for example, could be a good candidate for a successful meme. If that true idea is useful, people are more likely to embrace it and pass it on, even if they're sometimes drawn to false or misleading ideas.
Truth and utility, a powerful combination for cultural survival. But I imagine not all successful memes are beneficial in the long run, right?
You're catching on. Deutsch points out that some memes, particularly those he calls anti-rational memes, can hinder progress and even threaten a culture's survival.
Anti-rational memes. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What are some examples?
Think of beliefs that discourage critical thinking, superstitions, blind faith, and authority ideologies that punish questioning or dissent.
So these are like cultural viruses that weaken a society's ability to adapt and learn.
That's a good analogy, and these memes can become deeply rooted, making it hard for a culture to change even when it's necessary.
It makes you wonder about the anti-rational memes that might be lurking in our own culture, even those we don't recognize.
It's a thought-provoking question, and one Deutsch encourages us to consider. He argues that we need to be vigilant in identifying and challenging these anti-rational memes. We have to use our critical faculties to evaluate the ideas we encounter and promote those that are beneficial.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive recipients of culture. We have a role in shaping it.
Exactly. And Deutsch ties this back to his core argument. The growth of knowledge is essential for progress. That knowledge creation is driven by creativity, critical thinking, and a willingness to question the status quo.
So the evolution of culture and the evolution of knowledge are intertwined.
Precisely. Deutsch sees the Enlightenment as a pivotal moment, when rational memes began to gain traction leading to progress in science, technology, and beyond. But he also stresses that the Enlightenment is an ongoing project, a constant push against anti-rational forces.
This makes me think about the role of education and how crucial it is to cultivate critical thinking from a young age. It feels essential if we want to equip future generations to navigate the complexities of our world.
You've hit upon a point. Deutsch emphasizes we're not just observers in this grand narrative.
Yeah.
Our individual choices and collective efforts to promote knowledge creation have real impact. Now, are you ready for that deep dive into the multiverse?
Bring it on. It's one of those concepts that feels straight out of science fiction, but if anyone can make it make sense, it's Deutsch.
He starts with the premise that the physical world truly exists and is accessible through rational inquiry. You might think, well, duh, of course it does. But he's actually pushing back against a philosophical idea called relativism.
Relativism. Refresh my memory on that one.
It's the view that there's no objective truth, that everything is relative to a specific culture or perspective.
So instead of seeking truth, it's all just different interpretations.
In a way, yes, and Deutsch vehemently disagrees with this view.
Why is objective truth so important to him?
Because if there's no objective truth, the pursuit of knowledge becomes meaningless. He sees the quest for knowledge as uncovering truths about reality, regardless of our individual biases or cultural viewpoints.
So he's advocating for a rigorous, evidence-based approach to understanding the world.
Absolutely. He's a champion for reason and critical thinking and sees relativism as a threat to those values.
I can see how that makes sense if everything is relative. There's no basis for judging the validity of different ideas or making progress in our understanding.
Precisely. Deutsch argues that our explanations of the world can be objectively true or false, and the goal of science is to discover explanations closest to the truth.
Okay, so how do we distinguish between good and bad explanations? How do we get closer to that objective truth?
Deutsch talks about the importance of background knowledge. It's that familiar, currently uncontroversial knowledge we use as a foundation for building new explanations.
It's like the building blocks of our understanding.
Exactly, and when we encounter something new that our background knowledge can't explain, it creates what Deutsch calls a problem, a conflict that needs resolving.
And seeking a good explanation is how we resolve that conflict, right? It's like solving a puzzle.
Precisely. We need an explanation that seamlessly integrates the new phenomena into our existing knowledge without contradictions. This brings us to the importance of experimental testing.
Right. I remember highlighting a passage where Deutsch talks about that. Doesn't he say something like the essence of testing is having multiple theories that make conflicting predictions?
You've got it. He says there need to be at least two seemingly viable theories that can be distinguished through experiments. The experiment helps us choose between competing explanations to see which one aligns best with the evidence.
So it's not just about confirming what we already believe, but actively seeking out evidence that could potentially contradict our views.
Exactly. Good science, according to Deutsch, isn't about clinging to pet theories. It's about embracing the possibility of being wrong and constantly seeking better explanations, even if they challenge our preconceptions. This relates back to what he says about the Enlightenment. You highlighted a quote where he calls the quest for good explanations the basic regulating principle, not just of science, but of the Enlightenment itself.
Right. He sees the Enlightenment as this turning point where reason and critical thinking started to take precedence over dogma and authority.
Precisely, he points out that before the Enlightenment, many believed that all important knowledge had already been discovered and was enshrined in ancient texts or traditional beliefs. The Enlightenment was about breaking free from those limitations.
Embracing the idea that there's always more to learn, that knowledge is boundless.
Exactly. And the quest for good explanations is what drives that intellectual liberation. It's about questioning assumptions, seeking evidence, and continually refining our understanding of the world.
This is all incredibly inspiring, but it also makes me wonder, are there any dangers to this quest for knowledge? Any obstacles we need to be aware of?
It's a great question, and one Deutsch addresses directly. He warns against complacency, falling back into those old ways of thinking where we resist new ideas, or cling to outdated explanations. He's also wary of relativism and other philosophies that undermine the pursuit of objective truth.
So declaring ourselves enlightened isn't enough. We have to actively cultivate a culture of reason and critical thinking.
Exactly. It's about being willing to challenge our own beliefs, engage in respectful debate, and constantly seek out new evidence and perspectives. It's an ongoing process,
Yeah.
but crucial for the continued growth of knowledge and, as Deutsch argues, the betterment of humanity.
All of this really sets the stage for that deep dive into the multiverse. How does Deutsch connect these ideas about knowledge and truth to the existence of multiple universes?
Well, he argues that the multiverse arises naturally from our current understanding of physics, specifically quantum mechanics.
Okay, now we're getting to the really mind-bending stuff. Remind me what quantum mechanics is all about.
It's the branch of physics that deals with the behavior of matter at the atomic and subatomic level. And while it's incredibly successful at explaining a vast range of phenomena, it leads to some strange conclusions.
Like the idea of parallel universes.
Exactly. One of the key features of quantum mechanics is that particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. It's called superposition, for example. An electron can be both a wave and a particle, or it can be in multiple locations at the same time.
Hold on. Things can be in multiple places at once.
That's the bizarre but fascinating reality quantum mechanics reveals. But here's where it gets even weirder. When we measure a quantum system, it collapses into a single state. So if we measure the location of that electron that's in multiple places, we'll only find it in one spot.
So the act of observing somehow determines the reality of the electron.
That's one way to interpret it. But it leads to a question, what happens to all those other possible states the electron could have been in? Do they just disappear?
That seems like a pretty big loose end.
Right, and this is where the many worlds interpretation comes in. It suggests that those other states don't just vanish, they branch off into their own separate universes.
Whoa! So every time we make a measurement, we're splitting the universe.
That's the basic idea. And it leads to a picture of reality where countless parallel universes exist, each representing a different outcome of every quantum event that's ever happened.
Okay, my head is officially spinning. So in this multiverse view, every possible outcome of every event is happening somewhere.
Exactly. There's a universe where you won the lottery last week,
Uh-huh.
a universe where dinosaurs never went extinct, a universe where I had that extra cup of coffee this morning.
That is both mind-blowing and kind of terrifying. But is this all just theoretical, or does Deutsch believe the multiverse is a real thing?
He argues that if we take quantum mechanics seriously, we have to take the multiverse seriously. Those other universes aren't just hypothetical constructs. They're a consequence of how we understand the universe at its most fundamental level.
But if every possible outcome is playing out somewhere, does that mean our choices don't really matter?
That's a question many people grapple with when they first encounter the multiverse. But Deutsch argues that our choices still matter even if they play out differently in other universes. Our actions have consequences in this universe, and that's what ultimately counts.
So it's not about nihilism or fatalism, but focusing on our choices and their impact in our own reality.
Precisely. The multiverse doesn't diminish the significance of our lives or our actions. It expands the scope of possibility and reminds us of the universe's vastness and complexity.
This conversation is really making me rethink my place in the universe. It's humbling to realize how much we don't know and how much is left to discover.
And that sense of wonder is at the heart of science and the pursuit of knowledge. It's a journey without a final destination, a constant exploration of the unknown. Even if we never have all the answers, the act of seeking those answers is what enriches our lives and drives progress.
This deep dive into the beginning of infinity is truly challenging my assumptions and expanding my horizons. Before we move on to the final part of our discussion, what's standing out to you most from what we've covered so far?
What I find fascinating is how Deutsch connects these seemingly disparate ideas, the nature of knowledge, the evolution of culture, the possibility of a multiverse. He paints this grand picture of a universe where knowledge creation is the driving force, and where humanity has the potential to reach unimaginable heights. But realizing the potential requires a particular mindset, a commitment to reason, a willingness to challenge assumptions, and an unyielding optimism about the power of human ingenuity.
It's a powerful message and one that I think will resonate with our listener. Are you ready to explore that further in the final part of our deep dive?
Absolutely. I'm particularly interested in discussing Deutsch's concept of the jump to universality and what it might mean for the future of knowledge and progress. It's a concept that ties together many of the ideas we've been exploring today.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the beginning of infinity. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all these mind-bending ideas we've talked about, from those good explanations to this whole vast multiverse thing.
It's a lot to process, but there's one more big idea from Deutsch's book that I think will really resonate with you, especially as someone who's clearly on their own journey of learning and discovery. Remember how you highlighted the section about the jump to universality?
Oh, yeah, that definitely stood out, but I'm still not totally clear on what it means beyond the basic definition.
Well, imagine those moments when a system suddenly becomes capable of way more than it was before, often through what seems like a pretty small change, like picture a simple hammer, right? Now imagine it gets tweaked somehow. So now it can not only pound nails, but it can carve really intricate designs, pry open locked doors, even build complicated machines.
So it's not just about things gradually getting better, it's a sudden leap in what's possible.
Exactly. It's like those aha moments throughout history. A new discovery or invention pops up, and bam, it totally changes the game. Deutsch argues that the invention of the computer was one of those jumps.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. Before, computers, we were limited in how much information we could handle, but then we created the universal Turing machine, a machine that can theoretically do any calculation.
Exactly. The computer was a jump to universality in the realm of information processing. And Deutsch points out that these jumps aren't just limited to technology. The evolution of DNA is another great example.
Oh, right, from those early simple bacteria to all the incredible variety of life we see today.
And it all started with that jump to universality when DNA became the way to replicate. It completely transformed the possibilities of life.
So these jumps seem to be essential for progress. They push systems to a whole new level of complexity and capability.
And Deutsch thinks that understanding these jumps is crucial for understanding how progress happens. He says progress isn't this smooth upward climb. It's more like climbing stairs with these sudden leaps forward, driven by these moments of radical expansion.
So instead of always expecting things to just gradually improve, we should be on the lookout for those breakthroughs, the ones that totally change the game.
Exactly. And he believes those jumps aren't just things of the past. There are probably many more out there waiting to be discovered, each one with the potential to revolutionize our understanding of the world.
Wow, that's a really exciting thought. It means there's no limit to how far we can progress.
Deutsch is a firm believer in that boundless potential, but he also emphasizes that reaching that potential depends on us. It depends on a certain way of thinking, a commitment to reason and critical thinking, and that constant pursuit of good explanations we were talking about earlier.
So it's not just sitting around waiting for these jumps to happen. We have to actively create the conditions that make them possible.
Precisely, we need a culture that values creativity, welcomes different viewpoints, and encourages people to take risks and challenge the way things are. That's the kind of environment where these jumps to universality can flourish.
This makes me think back to our conversation about anti-rational memes and how important it is to fight against anything that tries to shut down critical thinking.
You got it. Deutsch sees the Enlightenment as this ongoing battle against those forces. He argues that protecting and nurturing the values of reason and critical thinking are absolutely essential for future progress.
It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't some guaranteed thing. We have to actively fight for it, create the conditions where knowledge can thrive.
And Deutsch believes that fight is worth having not just for ourselves, but for all future generations. He has this amazing vision of the future where humanity has spread throughout the cosmos, creating new knowledge, solving new problems, expanding the possibilities beyond anything we can imagine right now.
It's an incredibly inspiring vision. It gives me a sense of hope even as we face all the complex challenges in the world today.
That sense of hope, grounded in the power of human reason and creativity, is really at the core of the beginning of infinity.
This deep dive has been an amazing journey. It's challenged my assumptions, expanded my perspective, and honestly left me feeling incredibly optimistic about the future.
And that's what it's all about. Deutsch reminds us that we're not just passive passengers on this journey of knowledge and progress. We're active participants, creators, shapers of the future. The universe is vast and complex. We'll probably never have all the answers. But the process of searching for those answers, pushing the boundaries of what we know, that's what makes life truly worth living.
It's a powerful message, and I think it's something our listeners will really connect with. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you want to leave them with?
Remember, the journey of knowledge never really ends. Embrace your curiosity, never stop questioning, and always keep searching for those good explanations. Who knows what incredible jumps to universality are waiting for us just beyond what we currently understand.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity and given you a new way of looking at the world. Until next time, keep exploring and keep seeking those good explanations.